Mr Speaker.
Ko Kamo Sepuloni.
Mr Speaker, in making a speech about the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Advocacy Workforce and Age Settings Amendment Bill, I really want to start by referring to a quote that the Children's Commissioner's submission uses to start their submission, and that quote is, "When I walk down the street, I see families walking along, laughing, happy, and it is hard, knowing that I don't have a family like that." Mr Speaker, the whole purpose of this bill is to try and place children at the centre and create a system that better protects some of our most vulnerable children. And Mr Speaker, we really, as a political party, as individuals who care about these children, wanted to see this bill do exactly that. And there are so many aspects to this bill that we do support, Mr Speaker. In fact, this bill contains a change that we have pushed extremely hard for, and that is a raise in the age of care and protection. It's something we believe passionately in and was the basis of our support for this bill in every stage till this point. This is also the reason why we did support the bill at second reading. But this bill also contains a massive, regressive and dangerous set of provisions which will allow the Chief Executive to delegate powers that can currently only be performed by SIF social workers. There is no ability for Parliament to have oversight of these powers and almost no checks and balances in the way they will be delegated. Mr Speaker, we cannot support this provision when it could allow any professionals at the whim of the Chief Executive to hold powers like the removal of children. We stated at committee stage that we would only support this bill if our SOP, which removes the ability to delegate powers, was adopted. But unfortunately, it did not pass, and therefore, Mr Speaker, I reiterate, we cannot vote in favour of this bill at third reading. I just want to reinforce the fact that we didn't come up with our stance alone by making a decision based on what we independently thought when looking at the bill, Mr Speaker. There were lots of submissions that came through that support the stance we're taking now. And Mr Speaker, I do want to, alongside my parliamentary colleagues, also acknowledge every single one of the submitters who took the time to submit on this really important bill. In referring to the submitters, I do want to refer to comments made in the submissions that support the stance that I've just spoken about. We see in the Office of the Children's Commissioner submission that they raised concerns about the extension of functions currently designated only to social workers being shifted beyond that to the Chief Executive and to be used at their discretion. They questioned what this would mean given the current inquiry before the Select Committee on the Social Workers Registration Act and whether the two pieces of legislation are compatible. And we, as the New Zealand First member pointed out, questioned whether or not there was compatibility there. On one hand, there seems like there's a dilution of power and credibility really with the social workers' role and the functions that they performed when we look at the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Advocacy Workforce and Age Settings Amendment Bill. When we look at this bill, it looks like it is diluting the power of social workers. But then when we look at the inquiry into social worker registration and what has come out of that in terms of recommendations, then it looks like there is more weight given. So there was issues with compatibility, and that was pointed out by the Office of the Children's Commissioner. The Office of the Children's Commissioner submission also raised the point that their submission on the Act advocated for all social workers exercising power under the SIFS Act needing to be registered. And that's what the recommendation from the inquiry into social workers registration has also recommended. In fact, I have to say there were two opposition members of Parliament, myself and Derek Ball, that had bills up in the ballot last year to try and push for that mandatory registration, but we had to wait for the government to undertake an inquiry, not for any other reason really, except for the fact that they didn't want that change to be made under an opposition member of Parliament, which is disappointing. The Office of the Children's Commissioner also pointed out that they wanted to recommend public transparency and accountability on how the power would be expanded in terms of the delegation of powers, and that's something that we've always struggled with at the Select Committee committee because no detail was provided. There was no transparency, no accountability. How could we possibly support that delegation of powers? It wasn't just the Office of the Children's Commissioner that supported the stance that we are now taking with respect to this bill, but also the Human Rights Commission raised concerns. They agreed with the Office of the Children's Commissioner that there needs to be public transparency around the delegation of statutory powers. And citing one other submission, and that one is from Bernardo's, they believe that there should be restrictions on the ability of the Chief Executive to delegate powers, and also raise concerns about fragmented relationships for children and the need for monitoring and evaluation on how these decisions are made. So, Mr Speaker, it is unfortunate that we come to the House tonight not able to support this bill because, as I said, there are aspects of the bill that we have supported that we've pushed really hard for. The first one I said was raising the age of care. We did support that. We support that move and really wanted to support this bill because of the fact that we have been behind that for a number of years, not just as we were considering this bill. We have supported a change in legislation to embed the voice of young people in care into decision making. Of course we support that. Mr Speaker, we want to we also looking at the actual bill and some of the things that needed to be taken into consideration. The other aspect that we feel like didn't get enough attention when we were looking at this bill and considering it at Select Committee was the cost pressures that SIFs are under, Mr Speaker. So unless those issues are addressed, unless we can get some detail around the delegation of powers, then we will continue to have concerns moving forward. In fact, we'll be monitoring the space really carefully, Mr Speaker, when this bill is enacted, to ensure that it doesn't have any cause any harm to our children who are in the care of children and young persons and their families, Mr Speaker. So it's unfortunate that we are in this place, but we gave it a lot of thought, a lot of conversation went on in our own team as to whether or not we could support the bill, given that there are aspects of the bill that we support strongly. But in the end, Mr Speaker, we could not support the bill, given that the government refused to take out that one part in terms of the delegation of powers. So we are in this unfortunate space, but Mr Speaker, just to reiterate what's been said tonight, Labor will not be supporting